It began with the sound of something ending, deep beneath the marble bones of Terra, where the air was thick with incense and the hum of sanctified machinery. A tremor shivered through the ancient stone. The Adeptus Custodes froze mid-step. Chanting Mechanicus, adepts faltered, their mechanical limbs twitching as the sacred rhythm of the golden throne missed a single, impossible beat. Then another. The air grew heavier, denser, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The sound that had filled the galaxy for 10,000 years, the pulse of a dying god, stopped. In the first moment of silence, no one believed it. Servitors continued their automatic prayers, unaware their hymns now echoed in emptiness. Cherubim drifted through the incense clouds, their tiny vox grills still reciting the same endless litanies. But the custodians felt it in their blood. They were bound to him, their emperor, their lord. They knew his breath, his pain, his will, and now there was nothing. One of them, a nameless sentinel clad in battle-worn gold, turned toward the throne room. The great gate stood ajar, its edges wreathed in golden light that flickered like a dying star. The light that had always been constant, unwavering, now wavered as though shamed by its own mortality. He stepped forward. Each pace was a prayer, each echo a confession. The silence was not absence, it was pressure, the crushing stillness of divinity undone. At the throne's base, the tech priests were screaming without voices. Their tongues had been replaced with brass, their lungs with pistons, yet somehow they wept. One by one, their augmetics failed, their data slates erupted into static, and their eyes dimmed as the link between flesh, machine, and God fell apart. The nameless custodian reached the dais. The golden throne sat before him like a mountain of ruin. Vast arteries of gold and steel pulsed no longer. The sacred cables that fed the throne's core hung slack, dripping molten light onto the steps below. Upon it sat the emperor, a corpse too holy to decay, too divine to rest. His eyes, once blazing suns, were dull now. The skin that stretched across his face had the stillness of carved marble, cracked with time. The custodian dropped to one knee, his gauntlets trembling. His voice came as a whisper, swallowed by the enormity of the chamber. "My lord." No answer. He tried to pray, but the words refused to form. For 10 millennia, every syllable had been guided by the radiance of his will. Now, language itself felt meaningless, stripped of its God. He lifted his gaze, desperate, hollow. Around him, servitors collapsed like puppets with severed strings. Their mechanical limbs clattered across the floor, sparks scattering like fireflies dying in cold air. Then came the sound, a long, groaning sigh, not from the emperor, but from the throne itself. Metal strained. Ceramite cracked. The air filled with a low, unending wail as the machine began to devour itself. Prometheum lines rupturing, conduits twisting. The great veins of the throne bled gold. Outside the sanctum, alarms rose across the imperial palace. Bells tolled across the ecclesiarchal towers. The Vox networks crackled with prayers that turned to screams. High lords rushed to their chambers, shouting orders that no one could hear over the static. And across Terra, from the gardens of the martyrs to the ash gates of the Himalaysian fortress, the light in the sky began to dim. The custodian remained kneeling as the first of the power conduits exploded, showering him in molten shards of divinity. His armor smoked, but he did not move. His world had already ended. All that remained was the echo of faith, fading into the dark. The silence became a presence. It moved through the halls like a living thing, swallowing the sound of prayers, grinding through the gears of machines that no longer obeyed. The air in the sanctum grew dense with the stench of burning oils, and incense turned sour, the smoke hanging low as if morning dared not rise. Light from the failing lumen globes cast slow, pulsing shadows across marble walls lined with statues of saints who had never known mercy. The throne bled its gold in slow rivulets, bright against the dark metal like molten tears. The custodian still knelt, his head bowed, armor scorched. Around him, the tech priests twitched in spasms of devotion and malfunction, their mechulims locked in mid-praise. The void inside his chest deepened with every breath. He could feel the Emperor's absence pressing on his soul, heavier than the weight of his armor. For the first time in his immortal service, he felt afraid. He whispered again, but no words left his mouth. There was only static. A sound broke the stillness, a shuddering burst of vox interference. The custodian turned. At the edge of the sanctum, a line of skittery stumbled through the smoke. Their red cloaks were blackened with ash, augmetic eyes glowing dim as dying coals. They moved like the dead. Their leader, half machine, half burnt flesh, raised his head toward the throne and spoke in a voice filtered through broken vox cords. System integrity, null. Source, throne core collapse. Emperor Uflin. The custodian's gauntlet clenched. The words cut through him like a weapon. Emperor, offline. Even the Omnissiah's children, so precise, could not name this death for what it was. He rose, his armor grinding against the shattered stone, and stepped down into the molten light spilling from the throne's base. Every step sank into the viscous gold, burning the soles of his boots, but he did not stop. If pain was all that was left of faith, he would wear it as penance. As he approached the base, the air hummed, not with power, but with something broken, the death rattle of divinity. The conduits that fed the throne were collapsing inward, the sacred geometry of the Mechanicus design twisting into something unfamiliar. The custodian reached out and touched one of the pillars. It was cold, unimaginably cold, like the touch of the void beyond the stars. He looked up. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw the Emperor stir, a flicker of movement, a pulse beneath ruined flesh. But it was only the shifting of shadows, the cruel imagination of grief. His voice cracked, almost human. "We are still here, my lord." The words echoed back to him, smaller, pitiful. The light began to dim again, retreating toward the throne's center, as if the machine was drawing its last breath. The chamber shook, and the sound of collapsing metal filled the sanctum. The skittery were thrown to the ground. The tech priests vanished into flame as the conduits ruptured one after another. The custodian turned and raised his shield, absorbing the storm of molten debris. Every impact felt like the beating of a broken heart. When the roar subsided, the throne was no longer gold. It was black, burned and bleeding, a monument of shadow. Steam hissed from its joints, and the Emperor sat within it like a corpse carved from lightless stone. The custodian lowered his shield, eyes wide behind his helm. His voice was no longer prayer, it was confession. "We have failed you." In that moment, something deep beneath the palace awoke. A pulse of crimson light rippled through the floor, running along the sacred engravings. Machinery screamed in response. Somewhere below, the sealed catacombs that housed the throne's foundations began to quake. The custodian turned toward the trembling doorway, and for the first time in 10,000 years, he hesitated. He knew what awaited below. The throne had bled. Now it would rot. The quake rippled outward through the palace, tearing open its gilded walls like flesh. Dust fell in sheets from the vaulted ceilings. Marble saints shattered, their fragments scattering across the blood-stained floor. The sound of collapsing stone echoed through the sanctum as if Terra itself had begun to mourn. The custodian moved through the smoke, his armor streaked with molten gold, his vox filtering the static of dying transmissions. Each step took him deeper into ruin. Behind him, the throne groaned again, a metallic scream that lingered like grief. He passed through the Hall of Seraphs, where columns carved in the Emperor's likeness now lay broken. Cherubim servitors floated lifeless, their wings melted and their glass eyes dark. The light that once streamed through stained glass windows now filtered as dim grey through a haze of soot. Every color crimson, gold, ivory had dissolved into one endless shade of ashdot at the corridor's end. A great Mechanicus conduit split open, vomiting sparks and steam. The custodian raised his gauntlet to shield his face, stepping past it. He knew these passages intimately. They had been his duty, his world. Now they felt alien, their geometry warped by the death of the god they once served. His every movement was accompanied by the sound of machinery dying, gears seizing, sacred fluids boiling in their veins. The very walls seemed to exhale despair. The vox in his helm crackled. A faint voice pushed through the static. ... Custodian. Confirm. Throne integrity. He recognized the toner voice of one of the remaining tech priests who had not yet perished. He opened his channel. The throne is silent, he said. The Emperor does not answer. There was a pause. Then came a sound he had never heard from a Mechanicus adept. Laughter, thin and broken. Then we are ghosts. The transmission ended in a shriek of feedback. The custodian removed his helm and let it fall, shattering against the stone. His face was scarred, his eyes hollow, his breath ragged. He looked up toward the high vaults, where banners of the Imperial Aquila fluttered in dying wind. He moved toward the lower sanctum, following the tremors. The floor was cracked, revealing the arteries of the throne's machinery beneath. He could see molten light seeping through, the blood of divinity itself. He stepped over a fissure, the heat licking his greaves. A voice rose from somewhere below human, pleading, "Mercy." He turned, searching through the haze. A figure crawled from beneath fallen stoner, member of the Adeptus Ministorum, robes torn, face streaked with blood. The priest clutched a broken relic, its glow extinguished. He reached out toward the custodian. "He cannot die," the priest gasped. "He cannot, he is eternal." The custodian knelt beside him, his voice low, almost tender. "Eternity is a word for the living," he said. The priest's eyes widened, lips trembling. "Blasphemy," he whispered. "You speak blasphemy." Then his body stiffened and fell still. The custodian rose again, staring down at the corpse. "So does truth," he murmured. A deep rumble shook the ground once more. He turned toward the sound. From the far end of the corridor, a blast door began to buckle inward. The sigils of the Mechanicus burned red-hot before snapping, and a flood of white steam poured through the cracks. Beyond the door lay the catacombs that fed the throne's foundations. The place the Emperor's body touched, the machinery of godhood. The custodian gripped his spear. The air around him felt charged, heavy with dread. He knew what the opening of those catacombs meant. Containment had failed. Whatever divinity had sustained the Imperium was dying, and the corpse of a god does not die quietly. As the door collapsed, The darkness beyond it pulsed like a wound. The custodian stepped forward, vanishing into the lightless passage, as behind him the palace continued to crumble. The throne bled, the emperor sat unmoving, and Terra, for the first time in 10,000 years, began to die. The void itself seemed to forget how to breathe. Far above the dying world of Terra, the Astronomican, the beacon that had burned through the warp like the heart of a star, flickered once, then began to fade. For 10,000 years, its radiance had cut through madness, guiding fleets, sustaining hope. Now it was little more than a wounded pulse, trembling against the black. Across the galaxy, billions looked skyward and felt their gods abandon them. In the navigator's sanctum aboard the St. Drusus, triumphant, silence reigned. The navigator, her third eye open and weeping blood, screamed without sound. The warp, once a sea of violent colors, now spread before her as a rotting plain of ash. Every ship that had once trusted her sight was now blind, drifting through a void that no longer knew direction. Crewmen clutched at their rosaries, whispering the Emperor's name as the lights failed one by one. A single voice cried out over the Vox. No bearing, no light. He's gone. Then static swallowed everything on a dozen fortress wards. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica fell to their knees, psychic agony flooding their temples. The psychic choir of Terra itself, millions of bound psychers, whose souls fed the emperors, will burst into flame. The night sky over the imperial palace burned with the screams of the dying. Every mind touched by his light felt the moment it vanished. For a heartbeat, the warp fell silent. Then, from that silence, something vast and hungry awoke. It began as whispers, words, too ancient to translate, sounds that crawled through the dreams of mortals. Chaos had always been there, patient, watching. But without the Astronomican's blinding light, the veil grew thin. Demons stirred within forgotten corners of reality, tasting the air like predators scenting blood. In the cold dark between stars, where the void ships drifted powerless, new constellations, flared shapes made not of light, but of watching eyes. On the planet of Sancta Lycia, pilgrims had gathered to witness a miracle. The skies had turned gold the night before, and priests declared it a sign of divine ascension. When dawn came, the gold turned black. The sun itself dimmed, bleeding shadows across the hallowed streets. One by one, the icons of the emperor cracked, the statues bleeding molten tears. The people screamed, calling to the heavens, and the heavens answered only with thunder. Then, from the horizon, a storm approached, not of wind, but of flame and ash. By nightfall, nothing on Sancta Lycia remained. Far away, within the segmentum solar, a single transmission escaped before the Vox networks dissolved. It was a voice hoarse with grief, carried on a dying signal. This is the St. Drusus triumphant. The Astronomican is gone. We are adrift. The message repeated twice, then cut off mid-word, back on Terra. Within the darkness of the catacombs, the custodian stirred among ruins. He could feel the loss spreading like frost through the warp, a chill that reached even his immortal flesh. Somewhere deep within his armor, the tiny vox bead crackled, faint voices, desperate, fading. He listened as they fell silent, one by one, until there was only static. He understood then that this was no local failure, no wound to be repaired. The light of humanity had gone out. He lifted his gaze to the ceiling above, where dust and flame fell like snow. In that ruinous glow, he whispered the last prayer of a dying Imperium. Guide us still, my lord." The words fell into silence, and for the first time since the age of strife, the galaxy lay truly blind. It spread outward like a disease. What began as a whisper in the void became a howl of collapse that reached every corner of the Imperium. The death of the Emperor was not a single moment, it was a contagion, an unraveling of light that moved faster than thought. Every world touched by his gaze felt the wound open at once, and the universe bled faith. On Terra, night fell at midday. The once bright banners that hung from the towers of the ecclesiarchy turned to shadows. The great bells of the basilica clanged without rhythm, their sound echoing across the dying city. In the streets, millions gathered beneath the darkened sky, faces upturned, searching for the light that had guided their ancestors for 10,000 years. Some prayed until their throats tore. Others screamed accusations at the heavens. When no answer came, when even the echoes of their faith dissolved into the choking air, the crowds began to break. From the steps of the Sanctum Imperialis, the custodian watched the chaos unfold. His armor, once radiant, was dull and scarred. The red dust of Terra clung to its plates like old blood. He had no name left, no orders to follow, only the instinct to guard what could no longer be guarded. He moved through the masses like a spectre, unseeing, unheard. As the faithful turned upon themselves, a child knelt beside a fallen priest, clutching a cracked aquila carved from bone. The custodian paused. The child looked up, eyes reflecting the faint light still bleeding from the sky. "They said he could never die," she whispered. The custodian's voice, when it came, was soft enough to vanish in the wind. So did we. Above them, the last fragments of the Astronomican flared again, a desperate shimmer tearing through the clouded heavens. The beam split apart into thin, writhing veins of light that stretched across the sky before snapping into nothing. The warp began to bleed through. A crimson aurora spread over the world, painting the ruins in hues of madness. Vox towers screamed interference that sounded like distant laughter. Across the planet, the great manufacturer shut down in a cascade of failure. The Adeptus Mechanicus retreated into their temples, sealing doors and purging data archives. They had no equations for the death of a god. On the outskirts of the palace, the Astra Militarum formed barricades that faced inward, not outward. Orders came and contradicted themselves within moments, each one claiming authority that no longer existed. Far beyond Terra, the warp storms swelled. On Kadaya's broken grave, lightning burst through space itself. In the eye of Terra, demons stirred from their long silence. They tasted the vacuum left behind by divinity and smiled with teeth made of screams. The Emperor's absence was not victory for chaos, was hunger unbound. They came not to conquer, but to feast. Back on Terra, the custodian looked toward the horizon where the mountains bled fire. Vox channels filled with cries for command, for salvation, for meaning. He heard none of it. All he heard was the slow grinding of the throne collapsing behind him and the endless chant of billions of souls losing faith in unison. He turned and began to walk toward the palace. The ground trembled beneath each step. In the distance, the walls of the sanctum still burned, casting long shadows that danced like the ghosts of saints. Somewhere in the darkness, the custodian thought he heard a heartbeat faint, uneven, not divine, but human. It might have been memory, or madness, or something still alive beneath the ruin. He didn't know. He only knew the light was gone and the dark was patient. In the hours that followed, the void became a graveyard. The Astronomican was gone, and the warp no longer had a heart to resist it. Ships that had once glided between stars like silver knives now drifted blind, caught in unseen currents. Some collided in the dark, their hulls cracking open like eggshells. Others burned silently, consumed by energies no longer restrained. The screams of their crews echoed faintly through the a chorus of souls swallowed whole aboard the crippled vessel Glory of Soul. Captain Voss sat motionless in the command throne, staring at the dead instruments. The navigators were gone, the bridge crew reduced to whispers and prayers. He had sent a final message to Terra, though he knew it would never reach it. The Vox repeated the same distorted fragment again and again. The light is gone. We are blind. Emperor, forgive us. The message bled across the channels, carried by dying frequencies, repeating endlessly into the dark. On 1,000 worlds, those words became prophecy. Astropaths, disconnected from their choir, began to hear them in their dreams. Some carved the phrase into their own skin. Others recited it until their tongues split. The ecclesiarchy seized on it as the final revelation of faith, the confession of a universe abandoned. They called it the last signal, and every world that still heard it trembled. On Terra, the custodian listened to the same words echo through the broken voxrellas of the palace. The light is gone. The transmission was faint, buried beneath static, but it played on a loop through the ruined chambers of the throne. The custodian followed the sound through corridors that once held armies of priests and acolytes. Now they were empty except for the sound of wind moving through shattered stained glass. He passed the Hall of the Heroes, where statues of Primarchs towered in silence. Dust hung in the air like ash, and one by one the marble faces began to crack. When the statue of Horus split from crown to jaw, he did not flinch. Even stone remembered betrayal. The custodian entered the Vox chamber, once a cathedral of sound. Massive amplifiers lay in ruins, their spires bent like bones. In the center of the hall, an astropathic node still flickered, its core pulsing weakly with ghostlight. He approached, placing a gauntlet on the machine's cracked casing. The surface was cold, damp with condensation. The whisper of the transmission played once more, fragile as breath. The light is gone. He should have destroyed it, silenced the echo. Instead, he let it play. Its rhythm matched the faint beat that still haunted his mind, the one he had heard beneath the palace, the ghost of the Emperor's heart. It was impossible, heretical, but so was everything now. The custodian lowered his head. If you still hear us, my lord, guide us through this dark. For a moment, the static changed. The voice distorted, deepened. A new tone cut through the noise, low, resonant, almost familiar. The custodian froze. The machine hissed once, sparks leaping across its surface, and then the voice spoke again. He hears nothing. The chamber plunged into darkness. The machine died. The custodian staggered backward, his armor scraping against the stone. The words echoed inside his helm like an infection. He turned toward the doorway, breathing hard, searching the shadows for movement. None came. Outside, the last lights of Terra flickered out. The palace, once the brightest beacon in the galaxy, sank into shadow. Across the void, the final fragment of the Astronomican disintegrated into dust, scattering into the warp-like embers carried by a dying wind, and from that void, something answered. Morning no longer existed on Terra-only gradients of shadow. The sun, veiled by storms of ash and warp light, barely pierced the choking clouds that pressed down upon the planet like a lid on a tomb. Across the sprawl of the Imperial Palace, fires burned in the courtyards where worshippers had once gathered to sing his name. Now they gathered to burn each other in the ecclesiastical quarter. Thousands filled the Basilica of the Martyrs, demanding miracles from altars that no longer answered. Priests struck the stone floors until their hands bled, crying for visions, for light, for any sign that the Emperor still watched. When none came, when the sacred reliquaries ceased to hum, their faith twisted into something new, fierce, blind, and ravenous. A preacher climbed the dais, his robes torn, eyes hollow. "He is not gone," he shouted over the roar of despair. "He ascends. His silence is our trial." The crowd screamed in agreement, desperate to believe. But others, faces smeared with ash and blood, shouted him down. "You lied. You told us he would never die." The basilica cracked with the sound of violence. Candles were overturned, icons shattered. Blood ran between the pews like melted wax. In the chaos, the preacher's voice broke to a whisper. "Faith without light is just fear." The custodian moved through the outer corridors, listening. The vox channels were clogged with reports of riots across the city. Pilgrims were looting the reliquary vaults, the Ministorum was tearing itself apart, and the Astra Militarum had declared martial law. He passed squads of soldiers firing into crowds, their faces hidden behind visors fogged with sweat. The bodies piled so fast that servitors could not clear them. Faith had turned to frenzy, and frenzy to survival. In a narrow courtyard overlooking the ruins of the Promethean spire, a group of sisters of battle knelt in prayer. Their armor was blackened, their banners torn. The custodian approached silently, his golden armor dulled by soot. The Sister Superior lifted her head, her expression calm despite the madness around them. "He is gone," she said softly. "We felt it the moment the Astronomican died." The custodian did not answer. "But if he is truly dead," she continued, "then faith is all that remains." She drew her bolt pistol and placed it on the ground between them. Faith or nothing. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and left. Behind him, a single shot echoed a prayer in reverse. Elsewhere in the city, the Mechanicus fought among themselves. Half of the Magi declared the Omnissiah a failed algorithm, while others claimed the Emperor's silence signaled a transformation beyond human understanding. Skittery units turned their weapons on one another in a storm of plasma and steel. Data shrines burned. The binary hymns became screams. By nightfall, the glow of the palace could be seen from orbit, not light, but flame. Billions of voices rose and fell in desperate contradiction, each declaring their own truth. Some claimed to hear his whisper in the static of dead vox. Others swore his soul had ascended into the warp to become something greater. The rest believed the universe was now without purpose and began killing to prove it. From a shattered balcony, the custodian watched the world collapse. The air was thick with ash that glowed faintly red, like the dying embers of a funeral pyre. He could no longer tell prayer from madness, devotion from decay. All he knew was that faith, once the Imperium's greatest weapon, had become its disease. Below him, the basilica exploded. The shockwave carried the sound of a million screams, and then nothing. The wind carried the dust upward, erasing the last symbols of sanctity from the palace walls. The custodian turned away. There were no saints left to save, no gods left to hear. Only the dead. The smell of burning relics hung over the palace like incense turned to poison. The air shimmered with heat, the sky streaked red with smoke, that never dispersed. Terra was no longer a world, it was a wound. From orbit, its lights had dimmed to a dull scar, the mark of a civilization that had outlived its faith. Within the heart of the Sanctum Imperialis, where the Emperor's will had once been law, the High Lords argued over what his death meant. Some called it heresy even to speak the word death. Others whispered that perhaps he had never been divine at all, that the Imperium's god had always been Mortaland, that the lie had finally rotted from within. The custodian stood at the threshold of the Hall of Councils. He watched as the lords bickered, voices sharp, faces pale in the cold light of failing lumens. The Lord Commander slammed his gauntlet against the table, the sound echoing through the hollow room. "We must restore order," he barked. "The people must believe he still guides us." "Believe," hissed another. "In what?" "In a corpse that no longer breathes." Their words overlapped, building into a crescendo of panic disguised as authority. The custodian could taste their fear. It was human too human for those who had ruled in the shadow of a god. He turned away. They would die screaming in these halls long before they ever reached agreement. Outside, the Vox networks crackled with blasphemy disguised as prophecy. Preachers declared the dawn of a new god, the son of the Emperor, born from humanity's suffering. Others claimed the Emperor's soul had merged with the machine spirit, transforming into a digital divinity that would rise again through the Mechanicus' surviving forges. Every lie became a gospel, every doubt a creed. In the ruins of the ecclesiarchy, a new faith took root, a faith built on the ashes of the old. They called themselves the children of the dying light. They wore the symbols of the Aquila reversed, and painted their faces gold. Their creed was simple: if the Emperor had truly died, then humanity must finish dying with him. They set fire to pilgrim ships and hurled themselves into the flames, singing hymns of joy. The custodian saw their smoke from the palace walls and said nothing. He made his way back through the shattered corridors of the sanctum, past bodies half buried in rubble and marble saints split down the middle. The once living heart of the Imperium had become a mausoleum. In the chamber of the Gilded Gate, he found a lone Adeptus Mechanicus, Margos still alive, its body more machine than man. The creature knelt before a cracked terminal, chanting binary prayers to a screen that no longer glowed. When it heard the custodian's approach, it turned. "We have seen it," the Magos whispered through static. "The data confirms it. The throne is dead. The Emperor's energy signature has dissipated. All systems report null." The custodian's hand closed around the haft of his spear, more reflex than threat. "And yet we still stand," he said, "until the power runs out," replied the Magos. "Even the sun will one day burn to silence." Something inside the custodian broke at that. He remembered the voice he thought he had heard in the catacombs, the faint heartbeat beneath the ruin. He wanted to believe it had been real, that something of him still lingered, unseen, unreachable. But the truth pressed against his thoughts like cold iron. The Emperor was not ascended. He was not reborn. He was simply gone. A tremor shook the palace, the floor cracking beneath their feet. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere deep below, the last reactors of the throne sputtered and died. The light that had once filled the halls dimmed until only the glow of molten embers remained. The Margos lifted its head. "The god is gone," it said. "And now humanity must learn to live without him or die remembering him." The custodian said nothing. He looked to the ceiling, where faint beams of dying light filtered through the cracks, and whispered to no one Then let us see which comes first. The plague of disbelief spread faster than any contagion. On 1,000 worlds, shrines went dark, temples fell silent, and holy men either tore out their tongues or used them to curse the very name they once praised. The death of the Emperor unmade the galaxy in ways no enemy ever could. Where once there had been unity under tyranny, now there was only the gravity of despair, pulling all things inward toward collapse. On the hive world of Enoch Prime, where cathedrals rose higher than mountains, the faithful burned their own spires in mourning. The fires lit the planet's night for a week straight, a crown of flame to mark the end of mankind's God. Entire populations walked willingly into the blaze, convinced that their deaths would reignite his light. Those who refused were butchered by the same zealots who claimed to love him most. The Administratum tried to enforce order, deploying battalions of the Astra Militarum, but the soldiers broke ranks before the first volley. They threw down their lasguns, crying that they would not kill their brothers for a corpse on a throne. Across the void, on distant mining moons and Manufactura, the machine spirits went mad. Forges erupted in spontaneous flame. Data streams merged into incomprehensible code, as if the Omnissiah's ghost was trying and failing to rebuild the link between metal and faith. The Skittery who survived these mechanical seizures whispered that the machine god's silence was not absence, but judgment. They began carving prayers into their own steel flesh, begging forgiveness from machines that no longer cared. On Terra, the custodian walked through the remnants of the Imperial Gardens. Once a place of serenity, now it was a wasteland of blackened trees and cracked fountains. The air shimmered with the heat of feral fires. He could hear gunfire in the lower districts, the sound of the ecclesiarchy purging its own heretics. Above him, the sky was the color of blood seen through glass. He passed a squad of guardsmen kneeling beside a fallen chaplain. The man's Crozius lay shattered beside him, its head still faintly glowing. The soldiers argued in hushed voices, afraid to speak too loudly, as if their god's corpse might still be listening. He was wrong, one of them said. We all were. Another struck him across the face, screaming blasphemy. The custodian didn't intervene. He had seen this same scene replayed in 100 courtyards, in 1,000 halls. Humanity was eating itself alive. He reached the broken walls of the sanctum's outer ring. The once mortal marble was now veined with cracks, bleeding golden dust with every tremor. The city beyond was a silhouette of ruin, its towers leaning like the bones of giants. He looked toward the horizon, where the manufacturer burned in rows that stretched for miles. It reminded him of the wars of old, of the siege of Terra, of the time when faith had been forged in blood instead of broken by it. A faint light flickered then, far to the east a flare rising into the sky. For a heartbeat, hope pierced the ash. The custodian raised his helm, watching it rise. It was not sunlight or divine miracle. It was a missile climbing from the ruins of the ecclesiarchal quarter. A heartbeat later, the basilica detonated. The shockwave flattened everything for kilometers. A gust of heat swept across the palace walls, carrying with it the ash of the faithful. The custodian stood unmoving, dust coating his armor. The explosion's afterglow bathed the city in crimson. He felt nothing now, nor fear, no faith, only the hollow awareness that all of this had been inevitable. He had watched humanity worship its chains for so long that he had almost believed they were sacred. He turned away from the burning horizon and began to walk back into the palace. Behind him, the sky cracked with lightning that seemed to crawl rather than strike, red veins splitting the heavens. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the warp pressed closer, its hunger almost audible. The Emperor's death had not just killed the light, it had invited the dark to come home. The wind that swept over Terra no longer carried the scent of incense or the metallic tang of sanctified flame. It carried dust, the fine grey powder of pulverized stone, of bones ground to memory. The storms had turned the skies into a single bruised wound that stretched horizon to horizon, bleeding lightning through cracks of sickly red. From orbit, the planet looked like a dying ember still glowing, but fading fast. Within the Sanctum Imperialis, the custodian walked alone through halls that groaned with their own decay. His boots left prints in the ash that covered the floor, each step echoing like a prayer that had lost its words. The throne room was gone. Its pillars had collapsed inward, the great doors buried under slabs of marble, heavier than the titans that once guarded them. The golden throne itself was little more than a husk, now a carcass of divine machinery, cooling in silence. The custodian moved toward it through the debris, pushing aside broken icons and fragments of armor. His armor was cracked, his spear dull from fire. Every motion felt slower, heavier, as though gravity itself was grieving. He stopped before what remained of the dais. The Emperor sat unmoving, his body blackened where once it had shone. The faint aura that had always surrounded him, an invisible warmth, the proof of the divine, was gone. The custodian looked upon the corpse of the god he had guarded for millennia and felt no disbelief. The truth was not sudden. It had been leaking into him since the first silence. He knelt, laying his weapon across his knees, and lowered his head. The air around him trembled. It was not sound, not motion, but pressure, like the memory of a heartbeat passing through the walls of the world. For a moment, the custodian thought it was his imagination, the mind reaching for something to fill the void. Then he heard it again, a pulse, faint but undeniable, deep within the throne's remains. He rose, staring at the Emperor's chest. The flesh there glimmered faintly, a single spark crawling beneath the skin like lightning trapped in stone. He took a step forward. The ground cracked beneath him, fissures spreading in all directions. The light intensified, flickering between gold and red, as if the fires warred within the same dying ember. The custodian reached out his hand. His gauntlet hovered inches from the Emperor's face when the pulse stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the absence of sound, it was the negation of existence. A whisper broke through it. "Do you still guard me, child?" The custodian froze. The voice was neither alive nor dead, neither within nor outside his mind. It filled the air around him like smoke. He dropped to one knee, his head bowed. "Always, my lord." "Then guard what remains." The light beneath the Emperor's flesh burst outward, blinding him. When his vision cleared, he was no longer standing in the throne room. The chamber stretched endlessly, filled with light that had no source. Figures moved at the edges, familiar shapes, saints and soldiers long dead, all facing toward the throne. At its center, the Emperor sat not as a corpse, but as a silhouette of light, fractured, flickering. His voice came again, faint as wind. "The throne dies. The faith dies. But the will endures. You must hold it." The custodian reached forward. His hand passed through the light, and cold fire surged through his veins. Pain flared bright enough to shatter thought. He saw worlds burning, fleets torn apart, stars collapsing into red dust. He saw the Imperium breaking, its edges crumbling into the warp. Yet beneath it all was a thread of gold, a single line of purpose running through the ruin. He grasped it, and the light vanished. He was back in the ruin of the throne room, alone once more. His armor smoked, and his vision blurred. The Emperor's body was still, lifeless as before. But on the ground between them, a faint golden line pulsed once, then dimmed. The custodian stared at it for a long time before whispering, "I will." Outside, the storms deepened. Terra shuddered, as if in mourning. Yet somewhere within that endless dark, something small, fragile, and defiant began to glow again. The light that pulsed beneath the custodian's boots spread like a vein through the cracked marble. It ran in thin, golden lines that forked and tangled, climbing the walls, crawling into the ruined pillars until the entire chamber flickered as if breathing again. The custodian stared, not daring to move. Each pulse was slow, labored, and uneven, like the heartbeat of something half dead, trying to remember life. The sound was faint, almost inaudible, but it carried through the stone. He realized it was not the throne that was beating. It was the world. He rose to his feet and looked toward the Emperor's husk. The corpse did not stir. The eyes remained closed, the face unchanged. Yet the light around him had begun to form patterns, glyphs of ancient design that shimmered across his armor. They looked like prayers written in language too old for tongues to speak. The custodian stepped closer, his reflection caught in the fading gold of the Emperor's chestplate. He whispered, "Is this your will?" No answer came, only the rising hum of energy. Sparks leaped from the throne's severed conduits, dancing like fireflies, painting the walls in trembling halos. The custodian reached forward and placed his palm upon the Emperor's armor. It was cold at first, cold enough to burn, but then warmth surged beneath it, as though he had placed his hand upon the surface of a star. His vision flooded with images not his own, Terra as it had been, radiant beneath banners of gold. The siege, the war in heaven, the long silence after. He saw the Emperor not as a god, but as a man who had chosen to become one. And he saw what came after, a galaxy born from that choice, choking on its own faith. The vision fractured. He stumbled backward, gasping, his gauntlets smoking. The light dimmed again, withdrawing into the corpse-like breath into lungs. The air shivered, alive with static. He realized he was not alone. Figures had appeared at the edges of the chamber shadows, cloaked in the remnants of gold. Custodians, hundreds of them, their forms transparent and trembling, like memories of warriors who refused to fade. They stood in silence, their eyes burning faintly behind their helms. The custodian knew them all. Every fallen brother from the walls of the palace, from 10,000 years of service, gathered here in spectral ranks. He bowed his head. "You still guard him." Their leader stepped forward, or perhaps the illusion of one Dida giant wrapped in light. His spear fractured into beams of gold. The figure's voice was hollow but clear. "We guard what remains, but we cannot hold it alone." The living custodian clenched his fists. "Then what must be done?" "Carry the light," the echo replied. "It must not die with us." The chamber shook. The ghosts dissolved, their forms scattering like ash caught in the wind. The golden veins across the walls flared bright, then began to retreat toward the throne's center, spiraling into the Emperor's chest. The custodian understood then. This was not resurrection. It was preservation, a final spark refusing extinction. He moved forward, ignoring the pain that tore through his body, and drove his spear into the floor before the throne. The weapon sank deep into the marble, its golden filigree igniting like a torch. The light that had been crawling across the floor converged on it, flowing upward, burning through the metal. The chamber blazed. For a heartbeat, the Emperor's eyes opened. They were not the eyes of a god, nor of a man, but of something caught between. In their depths, the custodians saw stars collapsing, empires falling, and a single thought burning brighter than them all. Endure. Then the eyes closed again, and the chamber fell silent. The spear still glowed, faint but steady. The custodian sank to one knee beside it, his breath ragged. Around him, the throne lay in ruins, but the faint hum of power returned weak, wavering, but alive. Outside the walls, the storms eased for the first time in days. The winds shifted, and the black clouds began to thin. The world was still broken, the Emperor still dead, but the light had not vanished completely. It waited, fragile as memory, stubborn as faith. The storm over Terra had burned itself hollow. For days the sky had been an open wound of lightning and ash, but now even the thunder was tired. The air hung still, heavy with the residue of everything that had burned. From the shattered balconies of the Imperial Palace, the custodian could see the ruins of the city stretching to the horizon, oceans of debris. Towers snapped at their roots, temples reduced to molten glass. The world was silent, not the peaceful kind of silence, but the brittle calm of exhaustion after screaming. He stood at the edge of the great colonnade, his armor streaked with soot, his spear still glowing faintly from the light it had stolen from the throne. Every movement hurt. His body was alive only because duty refused to die. The wind carried flakes of ash that glowed faintly gold as they fell around him, the remnants of what had once been the Emperor's sanctum. Below, the streets were littered with the remnants of faith. Broken aquillas, rusted censers, fragments of statues that no one would ever repair. Amid the rubble, a few figures moved, fugees, soldiers, survivors who no longer knew what to call themselves. They scavenged for food among the bones of saints, too hungry to care about blasphemy. The custodian watched them for a long time. He felt no disgust, only recognition. They had nothing left to worship but survival. A shadow crossed the sky. The custodian looked up, hand instinctively tightening on his spear. A vessel moved through the clouds, small, battered, bearing no insignia. Its engine sputtered, then died, and it descended in a slow, spiraling fall. He tracked it as it crashed into the valley below the palace, a plume of fire marking its grave. For a moment, he considered going to it. Then he realized it did not matter. Every ship that reached Terra now came carrying ghosts. Behind him, the light of the spear flickered. He turned. The glow was fading, the golden pulse now barely visible. He approached and placed his hand upon the weapon's shaft. It was cold. Whatever fragment of the Emperor's will had passed into it was slipping away. He knelt beside it, head bowed. A voice spoke not from the spear, not from the air, but from within his own thoughts. It was faint, brittle as dust. "You are the last." He did not answer. "The throne is gone. The light fades. You must carry it, even if it blinds you." He raised his head, eyes burning beneath his helm. "Carry it where?" "To the void. To those who still remember." The custodian looked once more at the ruined throne room, the empty dais where a god had sat in silence for 10,000 years. He reached down, grasped the spear, and rose. The moment he lifted it, the light flared again, not bright, but steady, as though it had been waiting for him to believe it still mattered. He walked through the palace alone, past the fallen statues and the bodies of priests still clutching their relics. The gates of the sanctum hung open, twisted and half-melted. Beyond them, the city spread out in ruin. The wind carried the faint sound of human voices, scattered, fragile. They were still alive. Against all reason, against the death of their god, they endured. The custodian stepped onto the steps of the palace. Behind him, the golden spear hummed softly in his grip. Ahead, the horizon glimmered with the first light of dawn, but it was not the sun. The sky had not cleared. The light was a reflection born from the clouds themselves, a pale imitation of the day that would never truly return. He took a breath, his voice steady for the first time since the silence began. "Then I will be the light." He descended into the ruins, the spear blazing faintly with every step, a single spark wandering through the ashes of empire above. The clouds shifted once more. A faint echo rolled through the sky, something between thunder and a heartbeat. And then the world was still, and in that stillness, for the first time since the emperor had died, humanity dared to hope.